I recently had the opportunity to film with a program called KRAG, which aired on DSTV channel 144 KYKNET. The program's message very much resonated with that of Live Ready, and I personally believe that we need to have a means to leave our homes should it be necessary, access to the wilderness, as well as the gear and the skills to sustain ourselves once we're there. In this video, I'm going to share some of the behind-the-scenes footage from filming with KRAG, as well as the message that the program bears. I'm Clarice. Welcome to the Live Ready channel. I really had a lot of fun on set with the crew from KRAG, and we had some good laughs as well as some serious conversations. And before I go any further, I just want to thank the producers for making some of the behind-the-scenes footage available for this video. The program focuses very much on off-grid living and how different people have come up with different ways to live independently from the grid. To me, it's really important to be able to pack my vehicle and to be mobile. So if at a moment's notice I need to evacuate my home, which I've done on 2 occasions before, I need to be completely self-sustained from my vehicle. I then also need to be able to sustain myself should I have to abandon my vehicle, and that's where we start getting into primitive skills and the survivalist part of things. Don't get me wrong, you can need to make use of survival skills even if you've got some gear and equipment available. Even if you're living out of your vehicle or out of your home, it can be really important to be able to apply the principles of survival in the situation that you're faced with. If you're facing a fire, for example, and you need to be able to leave your home and you need to evacuate your family, you need to have the water tanks, you need to have the food, you need to have the means to boil and purify water. Even the mobility is important in a situation like that, because being able to move out of the way of that threat is just as important as being able to set up a camp. So on the set of KRAG, I pick up Konrad, the presenter for the program, on my way to setting up a base camp in the bush. And we have a little discussion about what bugging out is and why one would need to bug out at all. Now, whether I'm setting up a base camp or a satellite camp, or whether I'm just going on a camping trip, I've honestly believe that gear is really important. The skills are important as well. You need to know how to use the gear, and you need to also know how to manage without the gear. But I think that it's important that we choose our gear wisely, not just so that we have gear that lasts, but also so that we don't continually buy new things and end up polluting the environment in the process. This is particularly important in a scenario where we are really dependent on the wilderness. The last thing we want to do is to eradicate species or to pollute the environment to the point where we can no longer make use of the resources that we draw on from the environment. So for my mobile vehicle setup, I use Frontrunner's gear. Personally, I like it because it's easy for me to add things and remove things. I don't really have the technical know-how to plan and build things onto my vehicle, and to me, like I said, it's really important to have a mobile setup. So if I can add and remove things from my mobile setup really easily, a size 13 socket tool does the job. Really, even I can do that. If I can add showers and jerry cans and things to my roof rack, then anybody can do it. I've recently also added the Frontrunner rooftop tent, which I've also tested under some extreme conditions. Now, I don't always go and add things to my build by myself. I do have a company that helps me. They're called R&D Off-Road, and if you're in Cape Town, look them up. They're really cool. And it's really worthwhile having a company like R&D Off-Road who have the experience and the know-how to help you plan your setup, especially if your setup is going to predominantly be mobile and it's going to be based from your vehicle. Now, having set up a base camp means that you've got somewhere to return to, and this basically takes the place of your home. That's not necessarily going to be somewhere in the wilderness. You may be able to move to just an alternate location. And camping and overlanding make for a really good bug out practice. So if you were going to look for a bug out location, start with wild camping. So I've got the bug out kit as well as the camera crew's chairs on my car. There are people in the bush here. There's a whole film crew around here somewhere. But it really is just like thick bush. And I can hear them, but I can't see them. If we get onto the vehicle, we might be able to see some people. Ah, a boswandelaar. So after Konrad and myself had set up base camp on the set of KYKNET, and we had discussed some of the gear and equipment that you need for setting up a base camp, we went on to set up a satellite camp. So it's at this point that the skills become necessary. You need to have the background knowledge as well as the skills to sustain yourself outside of your home environment. And it's not just a wilderness setup. I know I focus a lot on the channel on primitive skills and survival skills, but you may need to make use of your knowledge and skills in purifying water even in an urban environment. So if the water sources in an urban environment are contaminated because of a flood or just because of a lack of municipality services, then you need to be able to purify your drinking water. Can you just imagine the burden on the healthcare system if an entire community or a city, and I mean we've had this in South Africa before, has contaminated water? And survival knowledge as simple as knowing that the golden standard for purifying drinking water is being able to boil it. A rolling boil for a minute gives you drinkable water, can already relieve the burden on the healthcare system in a disaster situation. Now, as this disaster progresses, you end up having less and less access to resources and less access to gear. At that point, you start to make use of your primitive skills more. So the more gear you have, the less skills you need. And the more skills you have, the less dependent you become on your gear. That doesn't mean that your gear doesn't simplify things, it just means that you've got a backup plan that extends so far into the weeds that you've got primitive skills and you actually just don't need the gear. It is important for us to select our gear carefully. So I, for example, really believe in KRAG hoppers clothing because it is insect repellent, it's UV protective, it dries quickly and easily. And if you've spent any amount of time in the bush and you've gotten wet, you've rolled around in the mud for whatever reason, and you've really needed some durable gear, having selected your gear really well beforehand really makes a difference to your experience in the wilderness, whether that be a camping trip or just to how comfortably you actually manage to survive. Now, if you're going to set up a base camp for an extended period of time, it really is worthwhile having a larger base camp tent set up on the ground, especially for like kitchen purposes. And it's also great to be able to separate where you sleep from your kitchen setup, particularly if there are predators in the environment. So I have a Tentco Sahara Junior tent that I set up as my base camp. Now, moving away from base camp and setting up satellite camps is important because you're going to need to be able to find resources. There's a reason why we farm, is because food in the wilderness is not as readily available as it is in our stores. It takes a lot of work to go foraging or to go hunting, and it also takes a lot of work to find and purify water. Now, this doesn't just apply in a wilderness setup, it also applies in an urban environment where perhaps the stores that you would usually visit are no longer operating. Maybe the grid is down and the card machines aren't working, so there are limited resources. We recently had an experience like that in the little village that I live in, where we were completely cut off because all of the roads were broken due to heavy floods. So our cell phone towers went down after a couple of days, so we had zero communication with the outside world. So if you didn't have a vehicle radio set up, then there was no way to communicate with the outside. To make matters worse, there was no way to get resources into or out of the village. And this is really just because of some heavy weather. And it's quite an eye-opener, because if you can't get any resources in and you can't communicate to the outside world that you need resources, then you very quickly start to question how well you've planned and prepared. Whether that be total grid collapse or a natural disaster or something more ominous like the implementation of the mark of the beast, during which time we know that we won't be able to buy or sell. That means you also won't be able to work or pay any of your bills. Now, these are all different parts of a disaster continuum, let's call it that. For any of these situations, we need to have a contingency plan that allows us to cope with that scenario. And there is wisdom in preparedness. There is wisdom in having thought through what the possible threats are to you in your environment. In the process of filming, we did have a lot of fun. I mean, and we worked hard, make no mistake. I think those guys came to my campsite at 7 o'clock in the morning, and Konrad, the presenter, having the absolute best sense of humor, really kept all of us entertained throughout it all. Now, as much as we like to prepare, both in skills and acquiring the right gear, it's also important to note that where we fail, God will step in. Matthew 6 verse 31 to 34 tells us to seek first the kingdom of God, and it really is important to place God first in our lives, because we will fail, we will come short, and where we come short, He will step in and provide the things that we need that we have not been able to prepare for. And where you sacrifice that resource in order to help someone else who didn't have that prepared in advance, know that you may have prepared for just such a time as that need arises. If you've liked this video, remember to hit like and subscribe. Go and look up the program KYKNET on DSTV KYKNET channel 144. And thank you very much to every single person who played a role in making that program and this video possible. Until the next time, live ready.